Welcome back to Nature's Corner. My name is Erin Shaw. I'm a naturalist with Ohio Department of Natural Resources. On today's show, we're going to be talking about reptile rehab and the proper way to do so. Our guest speaker today is Damien Oxier. So Damien, thank you for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me, Erin.
Yeah, so I understand you're a reptile rehabber.
That's correct.
And I understand that this is a very important process. There's very specific things, and the animals are protected.
Yes.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. For example, when I was a kid, I had all sorts of animals that I was helping, right?
Yes.
I had pet box turtles, I had pet bunnies, pet baby birds, but really I was finding them in the wild and thought that I was helping them by bringing them in and helping them feed them and take care of them. But I understand now that that's not the right thing to do. That's actually could be hurting the animals.
Absolutely. It's human instinct to want to help the animals, but we're actually their worst aid and not their best help. So the best thing to do is leave wildlife in the wild.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit of background about yourself first.
Well, my name is Damien Oxier. I run Arrrowhead Reptile Rescue. I started it in 1991. We've been wildlife rehabbers for ODNR since 1996. We take in about 50 or 60 reptiles and amphibians per year, native wildlife from Ohio. We also have rehabbers in Kentucky, but we're going to focus on Ohio today. In Ohio, we take 50 or 60 animals in. Mostly it's turtles. We do quite a few turtles, mostly hit by cars, hit by boats, things like that. And we fix a lot of things that humans cause to these animals. So they get damaged by our habitats and our vehicles, and we force them out of their homes. So we like to take those animals and help the ones that are injured and put them back in the wild. Okay.
And how did you get involved in this?
I grew up in Mississippi. I've been catching reptiles since I could walk. When I got older in high school, I was really interested in anatomy. Became a veterinary technician after high school, and people that knew I really liked reptiles just started bringing me sick reptiles, and it never stopped. So we decided to start the rescue.
Huh. That's okay. So what's the process of being a formal reptile rehabber?
Well, there's two categories in Ohio. There's a Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 lets you do orphaned wildlife, which are baby bunnies, rabbits, things like that need to be nursed. That doesn't really apply to reptiles because reptiles don't nurse their young. So there's really no such thing as an orphaned reptile. For reptiles, you would need a Category 2 permit, which is a more advanced permit that lets you take in injured and sick wildlife and treat them with medication and treatments.
Okay, so there's a legal process, right? It's
Yes.
illegal to take animals out and...
Absolutely. It's illegal to take injured wildlife and take them home and try to take care of them yourself. You have to have education in the background in veterinary medicine. You have to have special instruction in wildlife rehabilitation. There's a lot of reasons for that. Biggest is we don't want to be moving wildlife around. And a lot of people don't realize that. But you can't take wildlife from one area, relocate them to another area. We can actually spread disease that way. There's several diseases going around in the reptile world right now. There's one called chytrid fungus. It's BD in amphibians. It's actually illegal to take a lot of amphibians from one state to another right now, federally, because of this fungus. So we don't want to be moving amphibians around. There's also a snake fungus going around. We haven't seen it in Ohio yet, thankfully, but it is in nearby states, and we don't want to spread that.
Okay. And something else I personally have learned through this process is if, for example, I would take in a bunny, as a child, or a box turtle, and keep it in my house, try to fix it up, but when I released it, they become imprinted, and it actually makes it much harder. It may be even a death sentence, really, once you release them.
Well, absolutely. We don't want wildlife to think people are a source of food and care. And that's what happens when we take wildlife home and we coddle them and we pamper them, we give them names and we cuddle them up. When you release that wild animal, anytime they see a human in the future, they're going to recognize that as there's somebody who's going to feed me or take care of me. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Usually when wildlife runs into humans, the interaction doesn't go very well for the wildlife.
Yeah, especially with deer, it can be a big problem because people find baby deer, I get so many calls. Oh, we found this little baby orphaned deer. It's all by himself, and we took him home. We're gonna feed him milk out of a bottle, and which it's natural for the mother to leave the deer alone.
Even in the orphans, most of the time they're not really orphans. People don't realize that. Mama has to go find food sometime.
But they get too used to humans, and then they come up and we hit them with our cars. It becomes a problem.
Absolutely, and especially with turtles, they don't move very quick. So when you're flying down the road 40 miles an hour in a Buick, the turtle just cannot move out of the way in time.
Mm-hmm. So by placing these laws, it's actually meant to protect the animals.
Absolutely. Protect the wild population as a whole.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's important to go through these classes, and if you have the heart to help protect the animals, this is the right way to go about it.
Absolutely.
And you said the class one, like if I wanted to do a wildlife rehab, how would I do that?
The ODNR and the Ohio Wildlife Rehabilitators Association have courses. There's a minimum beginner's course. It's about 8 hours. That will get you the instruction and training you need to do orphan wildlife, the lower level permit. To get the upper level permit, you would need to serve under a Category 2 rehabber for at least 3 years and get experience before you can get your own permit.
Okay.
We actually have several other rehabbers in our organization who have all achieved their own permits. So.
Okay, that's neat. So someone could come and maybe work alongside with you?
Absolutely. I have 2 trainees right now that we're training to be permit holders.
Ah, that's fantastic. So with most of the animals that you get are injured, I know the goal is to always release them back into the wild.
Always. Sometimes we can't do that. DNR rules in most cases state that we have to euthanize the ones that we can't release, but luckily we also have an education permit, so we're allowed to transfer the ones we can't release to our education permit and use those in education programs. We definitely try not to do that. We want to release every animal we can.
Yeah, so that's where these come from actually, is through the education program. So we have the education permits. These were all captured animals. This one, for example, the story I was told was there was a lady that was caught with 43 box turtles in her house.
It's not uncommon, unfortunately. We get confiscated turtles brought to us by DNR all the time. And it's not uncommon for a turtle to be captured multiple times in its life. This is a woodland box turtle, also called an eastern box turtle. They live over 100 years. And they live in a very small range that they don't really leave. So it's actually not uncommon for a turtle to be picked up by a child and kept for 3-4 years and then released. Maybe 20-30 years later, another child comes along, picks a turtle up. We've actually heard of turtles that have had carvings in them from 1950s, 1960s with dates and initials, and those turtles are found decades later in the same areas that they were found before. So it is not uncommon for a box turtle to be picked up and taken home, but we definitely frown upon it, and it's not a good idea.
Yeah, well, and it's illegal. So
yes.
That's how we got this one. It was a court case, I guess. When I got this one, it had a number on it. It was the court number. It was non-releasable, and so they found different nature centers, and I was one of the ones. So that's
yes.
how we got all of these.
We end up with a lot of non-releasable animals because we cannot release them if we don't know where they came from. A lot of people don't realize that. We get a lot of animals from shelters that are dropped off at shelters or veterinarians, and oftentimes when we go pick up the wildlife, we're told we don't have any information where it came from, and unfortunately that's a death sentence for most of these wild animals. We have to have that information. So that's the most important thing if you do find injured wildlife. Not only can you not take it home, but wherever you do take it, make sure you document the information on where you found that animal so we can release it back where it came from. It's very important.
Okay, and maybe the date. And
absolutely, date and time and location of capture.
Okay.
They're all very important information.
That's good to know.
Because otherwise they have to be forced to stay their life in captivity, and we don't like to do that to these animals if we don't have to. They can not turn out really well when they're not placed back in the wild. This guy is a great example. This is another woodland or eastern box turtle, except he has very, very severe metabolic bone disease. His shell is severely deformed because of the condition that he has, and that's from not receiving the proper UV light, not receiving the proper diet, not receiving all those things that he needs to get out in the wild to be a healthy turtle. So when people bring a turtle home and they keep it for years and years and years and they don't give it the proper care, they get really deformed and malnourished, and that's a really big issue with these animals.
Yeah, isn't that sad? So I'm gonna compare these two. These are the same the same species, probably about the same age, but you can see the size difference even on the shell and the shape difference. And then also underneath. So from what I understand, that metabolic bone disease can be painful for the animals. We've taken Pumpkin in several times. She seems to be in pretty good health and, not in pain, but it is unfortunate.
Yes, the condition can be corrected some with husbandry and the proper diets and proper conditions, but the turtle will never look normal again. It will always have issues.
Yep, and never be able to be released.
No, absolutely cannot be released.
Okay. Yep. So that makes sense, as wild animals are not pets.
Definitely. Don't want to take them home, keep them as a pet, even if they're not injured. If you did want to collect any wildlife to keep as a pet, there are permits that are involved, and the animals have to be microchipped or tagged. So there's very specific rules that go along with that if you were trying to collect an animal as a pet. But we discourage that greatly. There are plenty of pets in the pet trade. There are many, many species that are bred very widely and make great pets. So there's really no reason to take any out of the wild.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about the process? If someone found a snake, I know we don't want to take animals out of the wild, but what is the process?
If you find a snake in your home, say in the basement or in your garage, and it's in an unwanted location, all you need to do is relocate them outside. You can usually do that safely with a golf club, with a rake or a garden hoe, any large implement tool that you can just pick them up on the end with. You don't have to hurt them, you can just gently pick them up and they'll actually balance on the end of a tool. I've got a snake hook here, which is what we use. I kind of demonstrate that. But when we put a snake on a snake hook or the end of a golf club, they will just balance there. So you can actually pick a snake up on the end of a tool and carry it outside and release it out in the yard without hurting the snake or yourself.
Okay.
Typically you want to release them in the same area it's found. Again, we don't want to relocate wildlife. We do get a lot of calls for people that find them in residences and they want us to come remove them. We actually don't really do that. Nuisance wildlife removal have a whole different set of rules that they have to abide by in Ohio. And ODNR mandates that usually they euthanize those animals that they removed. So that's one thing we don't want to do, is come in and do trapping and nuisance removal and euthanize those animals. It's better if we just release them out in their native environment.
That makes sense. So as an educator, if for the non-releasable animals, we have to go through a process with pit tagging.
Yes.
So all of these guys have been pit tags. They've all been documented into Division of Wildlife.
And those are some of the rules I was talking about, are the pit tags and microchips. The pit tag itself is in here. It's the same thing as a microchip they put in a dog and a cat. If you go to the vet and have your dog or cat microchip, it's about a little bit less than the size of a grain of rice. But it gets injected in with a pretty big needle. So it's definitely not a pain-free procedure for the animal, but yeah, we prefer not to do that if we don't have to.
Yeah. And with that in mind, if you have a pet that you bought at the pet store,
yes,
is it illegal? I know you should not release your pets.
it is illegal to release a pet that is not native to the area and was not removed from the area. Definitely shouldn't release any pets. Most of them are going to be exotics. They're not going to be able to survive in our climate here if they were released. The ones that can survive can actually be quite a problem. They become what's considered invasive species. I got a great example right here of an invasive species. This is a red-eared slider. Trachemus scriptus elegans is a scientific name. There's a couple isolated locations in Ohio where historically we have found red-eared sliders, but only in a couple counties. They're pretty much widespread throughout the state now because of released pets. So many people have been releasing these guys, and like the box turtles, they'll live over 70, 80 years. They live quite a long time. So when people get these as pets and they grow tired of them 20, 30 years down the road, they just kind of dump them out back. Unfortunately, they're quite a bit bigger than our native turtles, and they compete with our native turtles for food and space. This guy here is one of our native Ohio turtles. This is a Midland painted turtle, Chrysamis picta marginata. And as you can see, this guy's quite a bit smaller, and this is almost full size for a painted turtle. They only get about 5 or 6 inches. Most of our Ohio turtles are about 6 inches or less. So the red-eared sliders can get up to 13 or 14. They're kind of the Goliath of the turtle world, and they definitely are going to take away resources from our native turtles. And they've been released in quite large numbers. So there's another one, yellow belly slider, is also an invasive species. They've just been recognized since last year as invasive. So a lot of these pet sliders are common pet trade turtles. We can find them in pet stores, reptile shows. They actually sell them on the beaches. If you go down to Myrtle Beach in Florida, you can find these guys sold as little hatchlings from beach vendors and in gift shops. But if you take care of them, they actually live quite a long time and they get quite large.
They do get quite large,
Yes.
surprisingly large, because we took this one in again as an education animal, and they're growing rapidly.
Growing like a weed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they eat a lot. So if
do.
you're going to have a pet turtle, it's a commitment.
Yeah, but definitely do not release that pet into the wild. Once they're a pet, they belong in captivity and they should stay in captivity.
Yeah.
We actually do pet rescue also at Arrowhead. We do about 150 pets per year. And we take great measures to keep all the pets separated from wildlife. They have separate rooms that they're kept in. We have separate records. They're never mixed or intermingled together. So we take great pride in keeping wildlife and pets separated. They're two different things and they should be treated differently.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So before I put these guys back, at first glance, they look similar, other than their size, of course, because they both have some color on them. But if you look closely, the red-eared slider here has pretty plain, just this red streak here on his ear. They do have really pretty bellies, I think, with the spots and stuff, and green lines down their legs. Their feet are webbed, but something I find very interesting. We grab one of our Ninja Turtles here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so in case you didn't know, the Ninja Turtles were designed after the red-eared sliders, because with this red headband right here, and these guys, of course, were very, very hardy, but they lived in the sewer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
watched
fun
Ninja
show,
Turtles,
yeah,
did you? Yeah.
yeah.
Do they still play it?
I have no idea.
I don't know either. I don't know.
That's been a while.
It was a great show, but they were designed after the red-eared sliders. So these guys are not native.
We do have one native turtle that does look very much like a red-eared slider. It's a northern map turtle. So if you do see a larger turtle out, it may not be a red-eared slider. They're very difficult to tell the difference if you're not familiar with turtles.
Okay.
So.
And a quick look at our painted turtle here. They have more color all the way, including the legs, his neck, lots of yellow there, on his tail even lots of red, so much more colorful. And the bottom shell is not as colorful. So again, webbed feet, aquatic species, native painted turtle.
A lot of people don't realize that shell is actually bone. Like I said, we do about 50 or 60 of these guys hit by cars every year. This is a box turtle. Obviously, he didn't do very well with his rehabilitation. But you can see at one point in the past, he was hit and had quite a bit of damage. And that actually healed up. This is all new bone growth in there. If we flip that over, we can see how there's new bone growth inside. Yep. So this is a great example of how that shell will heal up. Unfortunately for this turtle, he got hit again later on. This time it was a head trauma and he wasn't able to survive the injury that time. We can't unfortunately fix it when their head gets crushed. But we can fix a lot of shell fractures. We do that by stabilizing the shell here. We usually epoxy these little eyelets on either side of the wound and we can wire them together. That immobilizes the fracture so that the pieces don't move anymore. It's kind of like putting a cast on a broken arm or a broken leg. About 6 to 8 weeks later, this bone has enough healing that usually the turtle will be releasable out into the wild.
Wow. So do you leave this? Okay, sorry. Tell me one more time. How do you do that?
We epoxy eyelets on your side, so we take like bra or shoe eyelets and a little dab of epoxy, and don't try this at home. But we put a little epoxy on there and we epoxy the eyelets to either side. We'll wait about 24 hours, let that cure and harden, and then we can go back and we can wire it together. We will typically remove that before we release them. They can be released with this on. The epoxy will wear off and it'll fall off. about 18 months down the road. We used to years ago do a really large patch with a screen resin and an epoxy and a fiberglass mesh, and those would fall off about 2 years out. The reason we don't do them anymore is we found that underneath those big large patches the shell would get necrotic and it wouldn't get enough air and wouldn't heal properly, so that's why we do it this way now. And I've actually got a newer method that I've been using the last probably dozen turtles this year, where I use a product called Tagaderm. They use that in human medicine. It's like a plastic sheeting with an adhesive backing, and we can Tagaderm back and forth across there, and that actually works quite well too without having to use epoxy.
Wow. So when you take the rehab course, when you become a licensed rehabber, I suppose that's when you...
It will not teach you this kind of stuff because, again, that basic course just teaches you the orphan mammals. That's nursing squirrels and bunnies. This more advanced stuff is where you would learn under 3 years under a Category 2 rehabber. Yep. So if somebody wanted to volunteer under us and train under us, we can teach them how to do that kind of stuff.
Wow. That's really neat. And much needed, especially with the box turtles.
Yes, and most of them do quite well. I'd say 80 to 90% of the ones that come to us with shell fractures survive. Wow. So a very high survival rate with that. Like I said, usually the only ones that do not do really well are the head traumas. We can't do much with that. And then bridge fractures, there's actually a bridge between the top and the bottom shell here. When those bridges get compromised on both sides, it's a very intensive case for the turtle to recover from. Yes, perfect, that bridge right there. So when those are fractured on both sides, the box turtles have a hinge. I don't know if he'll do it, but when they're threatened or upset, they'll go all the way in and close up, and he won't do it probably because he's too fat to actually
yeah, he's
close.
A little chunky, you know.
But yeah, they'll actually go in there and close up. If these bridges are both involved and they're both fractured, and typically they can't close the plastron doors anymore, and that's a serious issue. They can't be released that way. So those are very intensive cases. Sometimes we can do more intensive work. They're actually testing with blood transfusions now in box turtles. We're trying to figure out how to type turtles. They figured out that one box turtle species won't transfuse to another, but by transfusing only males to males or females to males, they're getting a high transfusion success rate with blood transfusions. So
interesting.
It's amazing what we can do with a turtle.
It's important too. Box turtles are on the disappearing species list.
Yeah.
Because meaning every year there's fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer box turtles. And it's hard for us to imagine. When I was a kid, we'd go out and, you know, it was normal to go out and find a box turtle out in the grass. But these days, kids come in, they don't know what it is. They've never seen one before, right, because their numbers are dropping so severely. And the reason for that is because they live in such a small range area. So when they lose that habitat, it can often be very destructive to the turtles. Also, they don't have very many young. The box turtle will only have 2 or 3 young when they breed each season. So obviously they don't have a whole lot of babies. They live 100 years, so yeah, we can lose a lot more box turtles than we get new box turtles. So habitat loss, I think they get hit on the roads in vehicles, often. And yes. Then also the pet trade. There's so many people, you know, that go out and say, hey, that's a cool pet, or I'm gonna help this little guy and bring him in, yep. And that's kind of the end of that one. Or relocation can also be an issue. There was a recent study about 10 years ago at Wayne National Forest here in Ohio, where they built a new road through the forest, and they tracked, I think, about 100 box turtles. They tagged them and tracked them for several years, and they found that once they built the road through the forest, less than half of the box turtles would attempt to cross that road. So things like when we build a road or a house become a barrier to animals being able to get to their original breeding grounds, their brumation or hibernation grounds. So yeah, human intervention can be devastating for wildlife species. So if you're driving down the road and you see a box turtle on the side of the road, what should you do? If it's in the middle of the road, you move it on the direction of the road it's heading towards. So don't put it back where it started, they'll just try to cross the road again. If they're uninjured, you should move them to the other side of the road, well off the road so that they're not in danger. If they are injured, it's okay to pick them up, only for about 72 hours, just to get them to a vet or a wildlife rehabber to get the proper care. Okay, but it's important not to relocate. Don't like pick them up and then take them somewhere else. And we have to have that argument with the public quite often. We'll have people, especially in construction areas, where they'll find box turtles in a construction zone, and they're very adamant that the box turtle can't stay here and we need to move it somewhere safer. But again, that's often going to be lethal to the box turtle. Even in construction areas, we want to relocate them within a very short distance around that site. They will adapt. Even where they built the road through the forest, 50% of the turtles adapted to that. And
and we're fine. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're pretty territorial. I mean, just this one, I cannot put these together in the same area.
Yes.
Because they will, I think they would fight to the death.
Probably wouldn't kill each other, but yes, till one intimidates the other enough that they leave.
Oh, mostly this one is aggressive. So anyway, thank you. That was great information. So did you want to talk about anything with a snake?
Oh, I love them.
Oh.
I'm always happy to talk about snakes. This is our largest snake in Ohio. This is now considered a gray rat snake. It's Pantherophis spiloides. It used to be called a black or an eastern rat snake, but they keep reclassifying reptiles, it seems, on a yearly basis anymore, so it's almost hard to keep up with some of these taxonomic names. But again, this is now a gray rat snake, largest snake in Ohio and the most abundant. As you can see, they're actually fairly docile. They're not too aggressive. In the wild, they would definitely try to bite you if you picked it up. Again, because this is an education animal and you've had him in captivity, he's much calmer. But yeah, snakes are very important in our ecosystem. They control rodent populations. So without the snakes, we would be overrun with mice and rats, and nobody would like that. Even the venomous snakes here in Ohio, we have 3. A lot of people aren't aware of that. They're just as important as our non-venomous snakes. 2 of them are an endangered species. The Massasauga and the timber rattlesnakes are both endangered in Ohio. And copperheads are very quickly depleting. We don't find very many copperheads anymore either.
Wow. So I think as we're coming to our conclusion here, it's really important for people to know how to contact you, or if, say, you know, I would like to start into this practice and maybe work under you to get my rehab permit.
Absolutely. Our website is www.arrowheadreptilerescue.org. Anyone interested in helping us out or volunteering can start at our website and contact us that way. Our telephone number is 442-HERP. It's 513-442-4377.
Okay.
So we're happy to hear from anybody who wants to help. We have about 68 active volunteers right now. We have 32, I believe, foster homes with animals at the moment, about 5 rehabbers, 4 veterinarians, about 6 vet techs. So we do quite a bit.
That's great. And I know that animals, just feeding them alone is expensive.
Yes. I'm not sure which of our bills is higher, the electric bill or the feeding bill. They're in competition with each other most months.
Yeah, so do you get paid to do this?
No, this is all volunteer. Everything we do is donation funded. We don't get any money from the state. A lot of people think, oh, you're a wildlife rehabber, the state's giving you funds, and they do not. So everything we do is donations from the public. So we take all the help we can get.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I know that you're local. I myself have called you a few times. Hey, you know, what do I do with this? And you gave me great advice. So.
Well, thank you for having me. We're going to fix that turtle up here in just a few minutes.
All right. Well, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
So that's it for today's show. If you have more questions, you can check us out online at ohiostateparks.gov, or you can stop by the Nature Center.